In Britain's darkest hour, one man's voice cut through the gloom. Winston Spencer Churchill, statesman, soldier, and orator, stood as the symbol of defiance. At the cusp of World War II, Churchill declared, "You ask, what is our policy? It is to wage war. What is our aim? It is victory." His determined scowl and ever-present V-sign would rally a nation under siege. This is the story of a boy born amid palatial grandeur who became Prime Minister of Britain, and whose legacy echoes through history. This is the journey of Winston Churchill, the leader the world needed when it needed him most. This is the untold story of Winston Churchill, the man who led Britain through its darkest hour. Winston Churchill was born on November 30, 1874, in the grandeur of Blenheim Palace, Oxfordshire, the ancestral seat of the Dukes of Marlborough. From the very beginning, his life was set against a backdrop of power, privilege, and pressure. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a brilliant but volatile politician, a man whose charisma lit up Parliament, but whose inner demons often cast shadows over his family. His mother, Lady Randolph Churchill, born Jenny Jerome, was a dazzling American socialite, admired in both London and New York. Yet despite his noble blood, young Winston's childhood was marked more by absence than affection. His parents were distant figures, more consumed by society than by parenting. In their place, a warm and nurturing figure stepped in, Mrs. Elizabeth Everest, his beloved nanny. To Winston, she was simply a womany. She became his confidant, his comfort, his first true companion. Years later, Churchill would write of how he poured out his childhood sorrows into her arms. And when both his father and womany died in the same year, 1895, he felt the loss of what he called all my dreams of comradeship. Even as a child, Winston was captivated by the grand sweep of history, drawn to tales of valor and empire. But behind the fascination was a lonely, defiant boy, rebellious at school, and already marked by a longing to prove himself to the world. At just 7 years old, Winston Churchill was sent away to boarding school, a place he would remember for its cold dormitories, brutal discipline, and bouts of illness. The beatings, he later recalled, were not uncommon. It was the beginning of a long and difficult academic journey. By 1888, Winston entered Harrow School, one of England's most prestigious institutions. But prestige didn't translate to performance. He was ranked near the bottom in entrance exams. Still, the young Churchill was far from dull. He had a photographic memory and a love for poetry. He once memorized over 1,200 lines of Lord Macaulay's Lays of Ancient Rome, winning a school prize for his recitation. By age 13, he had joined the Harrow Rifle Corps, setting his sights on a future in the military. His mother, Lady Randolph, despaired of his academic struggles. In one letter, she wrote, "I had built up such hopes about you, and now all is gone. Your work is an insult to your intelligence." Churchill later admitted that Latin and Greek left him cold. "In all my school years," he quipped, "no one ever succeeded in making me write a Latin verse." Despite his academic struggles, Churchill's youth revealed sparks of the man he would become. He was introspective and creative, keeping detailed diaries, painting watercolors, and reading voraciously on military strategy and political history. At age 20, on his third attempt, he was finally admitted to Sandhurst Military College, and in 1895 he earned his commission as a second lieutenant in the 4th Queen's Own Hussars. Thanks to his mother's powerful connections, Winston's military career began not in a quiet garrison, but in the corners of empire where the gun still roared. He was posted to India and soon volunteered for combat. Churchill was no ordinary soldier, he was also a writer. As a war correspondent, he sent back vivid accounts of the battles on the northwest frontier in 1897 and the British campaign in the Sudan in 1898. His dispatches were gripping and his voice unmistakable. The reports became bestsellers, the story of the Malakand Field Force and the River War. By the age of 25, Churchill had already earned over £10,000, a fortune in those days, through his writing and lectures, funding his leap into politics with both pen and sabre. Fresh from the fire of South Africa's Boer War, and newly famous for his daring escape from a prison camp, Winston Churchill returned to Britain a national hero. He was just 25. In the general election of 1900, Churchill won a Conservative seat for Oldham, despite having never lived there. He was bold, well-spoken, and already a household name. Vanity Fair declared, "He can write and he can fight, and he means to get on." In Parliament, Churchill's reputation only grew. By early 1901, he was earning a small fortune through public lectures and newspaper columns. While visiting North America, he met US President Kinley and Canadian leaders, all while building his image as a future statesman. Though born into the aristocracy and a proud conservative, Churchill was restless. He favored reforms to ease the suffering of the poor, and he clashed with his party over tariffs and protectionism. In 1904, he stunned the political class by crossing the floor, joining the Liberals. "I feel no sympathy with Tory methods," he announced. Churchill's bold move paid off. In 1908, at just 33, he was appointed President of the Board of Trade under Prime Minister Asquith. As one of Britain's youngest cabinet members, he helped launch the modern welfare state. Churchill helped create labour exchanges, unemployment insurance, and pensions for the elderly. He set limits on working hours and established courts for strike arbitration, pioneering reforms that would shape British society for decades. By 1910, he was Home Secretary. A year later, he became First Lord of the Admiralty, Britain's naval minister. Churchill set about modernising the Royal Navy and warning of Germany's growing naval threat. He travelled the world, spoke for women's suffrage, and prepared for the conflict he saw looming on the horizon. By 1914, Europe stood on the brink of war. And Winston Churchill, barely 40 years old, stood at the heart of Britain's war cabinet. When the Great War broke out in August 1914, Winston Churchill held one of the most powerful offices in Britain, First Lord of the Admiralty. At just 39, he commanded the Royal Navy, and with it, the fate of the Empire's global power. Churchill saw opportunity in the chaos. He believed an assault on the Ottoman Empire, via the Dardanelles Strait, could change the course of the war. With his usual audacity, he co-authored plans for a surprise naval and amphibious offensive to knock Turkey out of the war and open a route to Russia. In March 1915, the Dardanelles campaign began. But confusion, divided command, and poor reinforcements turned Churchill's gamble into catastrophe. Allied forces were slaughtered at Gallipoli. By early 1916, the campaign had collapsed. Over 250,000 Allied casualties, for nothing gained. Churchill wrote bitterly, the Dardanelles was starved and crippled at every stage. Politically, the backlash was swift. Prime Minister Asquith formed a coalition, and under pressure from the Conservatives, Churchill was pushed out of the Admiralty. "I am finished," he wrote privately. A victim of political intrigue. But Winston Churchill was not one to fade quietly. He resigned from the cabinet and volunteered for frontline duty in France. Trading his silk hat for a tin helmet, Churchill became a lieutenant colonel in the Royal Scots Fusiliers. In the mud and blood of the Western Front, he led troops under fire. "I was happy as a pig in mud," he would later joke. It was there, among soldiers, that he found something he'd lost, a sense of purpose. In 1917, Churchill helped defeat a German raid in Belgium. By 1918, the war was turning. The armistice came. Churchill returned to London and was appointed Minister of Munitions, a role critical to ending the conflict. In 1919, under Prime Minister David Lloyd George, Churchill became Secretary of State for War and Air. The boy who had once read cavalry manuals in bed was now in charge of demobilizing an empire. The war was over, but Winston Churchill's battles had just begun. Appointed Secretary of State for War and Air in 1919, he now faced a crumbling empire. As Colonial Secretary in 1921, Churchill helped negotiate the Anglo-Irish Treaty, a deal that ended the Irish War of Independence but ignited civil war in Ireland. A hideous climax, Churchill would later call it. Yet Churchill's political standing was faltering. In 1922, he lost his seat in Parliament. He would spend the next 2 years in the political wilderness, wounded but never quiet. Then, in 1924, Churchill made a surprising return, rejoining the Conservative Party. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin appointed him Chancellor of the Exchequer. Draped in his father's ceremonial robes, he told Parliament, "I shall be proud to serve you in this splendid office." But Churchill's financial instincts did not match the new economic age. In 1925, he returned Britain to the gold standard, a decision historians later condemned for worsening unemployment and exports. A stroke in 1926 sidelined him briefly, but he recovered. In 1929, Baldwin's Conservatives lost the election, and once again, Churchill was pushed aside. What followed was a decade out of power and into pen. The 1930s were Churchill's wilderness years, years of warning. He devoted himself to writing, publishing biographies, memoirs, and histories to stay afloat. But his voice in Parliament grew more urgent and more isolated. As Hitler rose in Germany, Churchill warned of rearmament. "Germany is rapidly arming, and no one will stop her," he told a Parliament that refused to listen. Initially, Churchill thought Hitler might restore Germany's pride. But by 1935, he saw the threat clearly. When the Nazis marched into the Rhineland, annexed Austria, and demanded Czechoslovakia, Churchill thundered warnings from the backbenches. He called the Munich Agreement of 1938 a total and unmitigated defeat. While Chamberlain waved a piece of paper and spoke of peace for our time, Churchill prophesied war. He even envisioned a joint Anglo-American air defense pact to counter growing threats, a bold foresight long before NATO. By 1939, with war on the doorstep, Britain still mistrusted him, but the storm would soon demand a wartime leader. On May 10, 1940, with Nazi tanks rolling across Western Europe, Neville Chamberlain resigned. King George VI summoned Winston Churchill. The long wait was over. Churchill would later write, "I felt as if my whole life had been but a preparation for this hour." It was a baptism by fire. Within weeks, France collapsed. Britain stood alone. The skies above became the battleground. In the summer of 1940, the Luftwaffe launched the largest air assault in history. The Battle of Britain had begun. Day after day, British fighter pilots clashed with German bombers. Churchill's voice rang out over radios. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. On September 17, 1940, Hitler cancelled Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain. The island nation had held firm. As bombs rained down in the Blitz, Churchill toured the ruins of London, cigar clenched, black coat flapping, defying despair. He declared, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight in the fields, we shall never surrender." But survival wasn't enough. Churchill needed allies. In 1941, he crossed the Atlantic and met with US President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Together they drafted the Atlantic Charter, envisioning a post-war world of freedom and self-determination. That same year, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. Churchill responded, "If Hitler invaded hell, I would make at least a favorable reference to the devil in the House of Commons." The enemy of my enemy was now his ally. The Grand Alliance, Britain, America, and the USSR, was born. Years of war followed. Churchill agreed to delay a direct assault on France, targeting Italy first. But in 1944, the time came. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, Allied forces launched the greatest amphibious assault in history. British, Canadian, and American troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. A masterstroke of deception, Operation Fortitude, had fooled Hitler into thinking the invasion would come at Calais. From the west and the east, the Allied jaws began to close. Churchill coordinated strategy at summit meetings with Roosevelt and Stalin, the Big Three. In April 1945, Berlin fell. Hitler was dead. On May 8, Churchill appeared before cheering crowds in London. Victory in Europe was complete. Churchill's finest hour had become a nation's triumph. Victory had been won. In May 1945, Churchill stood as the face of triumph. As head of a temporary caretaker government, he returned to the Admiralty just in time to see the Axis collapse. But peace brought politics, and politics brought change. On July 26, 1945, Britain went to the polls. Churchill warned of new dangers. "We shall have to stand together against future enemies, and pray to God our allies do not desert us." The result stunned the world. Labour won a landslide. Churchill, the saviour of Britain, was out. The war hero had lost the peace. In Parliament, Churchill announced the defeat with bitter wit. "I have many years for my vexations, many years for my disappointments." Clementine tried to console him. "It may well be a blessing in disguise," she said. He replied, "At the moment it seems quite effectively disguised." From 1945 to 1951, Churchill sat in opposition. But he never faded. His voice still mattered. In March 1946, in a small American town, Fulton, Missouri, Churchill delivered a speech that shook the world. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. He warned that Soviet domination was rising, and the Western world must unite before it was too late. The Iron Curtain speech marked the symbolic start of the Cold War. Churchill, once the lone voice against Hitler, now warned against Stalin. He continued writing his memoirs, meticulously, passionately, eventually earning the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953. In private, Churchill painted landscapes and brooded over British decline. His health was deteriorating. In 1953, at age 78, he suffered a severe stroke. But he would not yet retire. The lion still had one last roar to give. Against all odds, at age 76, Winston Churchill returned to 10 Downing Street. The year was 1951. After 6 years in opposition, Churchill led the Conservatives to victory and became Prime Minister for the second time. This time, it would be a different kind of leadership. Britain was no longer the empire he had once fought to preserve. He served for 4 more years, with Anthony Eden as his loyal Foreign Secretary and eventual successor. Though slowed by age and illness, and his ever-present cigars, Churchill remained determined. He traveled extensively to bolster NATO and strengthen ties with America amid Cold War tensions. In 1953, honors poured in. He was made a Knight of the Garter and awarded the Order of Merit. That same year, he became the first British Prime Minister, and only non-American, to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. The citation praised his mastery of historical and biographical description, and his brilliant oratory in defense of exalted human values. By then, Churchill was the elder statesman of the Western Alliance, a living legend who had stared down Hitler, Stalin, and the storms of history. But time could not be defied forever. In 1955, at age 80, he quietly resigned. He had presided over the twilight of the British Empire. He once called Indian independence the beginning of the inevitable. Now, Churchill left a Britain reshaped by war, by social transformation, and by his own towering legacy. On the 24th of January, 1965, Winston Churchill passed away at the age of 90. His state funeral, held 6 days later, was the largest and most elaborate in British history. His coffin lay in state at Westminster Hall, where thousands paid their respects. The solemn ceremony at St. Paul's Cathedral was attended by Queen Elizabeth II, world leaders, and dignitaries from across the globe. Millions lined the funeral route through London, while an estimated 350 million people worldwide watched the BBC broadcast. In a national poll, Churchill was voted the greatest Briton of all time, a testament to the enduring power of his legacy. Queen Elizabeth II hailed him as the supreme guardian of our liberties, whose leadership preserved Britain in its greatest danger. President Lyndon Johnson declared Churchill a man who created history and would be remembered as long as history is read. Statues honouring Churchill stand proudly in Parliament Square, as well as outside the Canadian and US capitals. His speeches, including "This was their finest hours" and a "Never, never, never give in," continue to inspire generations. Churchill's legacy is complex, a mix of triumphs and controversies, but undeniably immense. A prolific author, Nobel laureate, and statesman, he shaped the course of the 20th century. He left behind a story of resilience, patriotism, and the enduring belief that even in humanity's darkest hours, principled leadership can light the way. His indomitable spirit lives on wherever freedom and courage are championed. Winston Churchill once said, "History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it." And so he did. He led a nation through fire. He rallied the world against tyranny. He spoke words that stirred souls and steeled resolve. Churchill was not perfect, but he was fearless, unyielding, visionary. He was, above all, a man who stood when others faltered and dared to believe that courage could change the course of history. His voice may be gone, but his echo still rolls through time. This was his finest hour.